Do you think it's bad timing that Sue Gray's appointment has also emerged now and gives the Conservatives a reason to discredit what we've learnt so far?
Well, no, because actually both reports are very clear indeed. They're based on incontrovertible evidence. It was very clear that Boris Johnson broke the rules, that he was, for example, engaged in social and drinking events during those periods when actually ordinary people in our country, they were following the rules, often at huge personal cost, not able to see their relatives, for example, when they were incredibly unwell, not able to attend funerals. I think there's a really big question for Rishi Sunak now. Will he continue to prop up the former disgraced Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, with his huge legal defence fund? Or will he be clear, actually, that if Boris Johnson has been found to have lied repeatedly to Parliament, to have misled Parliament repeatedly, that actually Boris Johnson's career should be over? Big questions for Rishi Sunak around whether he has the strength to take Boris Johnson on in that way.
I mean, you're talking about Boris Johnson's political career potentially being over. Do you think that he should face sanctions following this investigation?
Well, I think above all, he shouldn't be supported effectively through government money with the legal defence fund. I think that's completely unacceptable. Ultimately, Rishi Sunak should not be supporting Boris Johnson in that way. And I think there should be political repercussions for Boris Johnson if he's found to have repeatedly misled Parliament. The ability to impose that kind of a sanction on Boris Johnson is in the hands of Rishi Sunak, of course, as the leader of the Conservative Party. And I just hope that he has the backbone to make sure that action is taken.
Is Labour concerned that the appointment of Sue Gray as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff is going to be a distraction and will be used by the Conservatives and Boris Johnson loyalists to discredit this investigation?
Well, quite the opposite. Sue Gray is a person of enormous integrity, someone who served in the civil service under ministers of a number of parties, actually, someone who's always served with that integrity. I'm really delighted she's joining the Labour team at that point where we're readying ourselves for government if the British public backs us at the next general election, where we're determined to build a better Britain. And it's really great that Sue Gray will be on board with us doing that.
Yeah, but you can understand why the optics aren't great, are they? It gives loyalists to Boris Johnson a reason to say that this report by Sue Gray was politically motivated. Even just the impression of impropriety can erode trust.
Well, what eroded trust was the repeated rule breaking by Boris Johnson. And we didn't need, as Labour said repeatedly at the time, we didn't actually need an investigation to be clear that rules had been broken, because we could all see that in the photographs that were published. We could see it in the police investigation that took place, which found that evidence of rule breaking and which, of course, imposed a fine. And really, there should not be one rule for senior Conservatives and a different rule for everybody else. But that's what we saw taking place during that COVID period. And the British public has not forgotten it from the conversations that I have with people up and down the country.
I mean, civil servants have moved into party positions before, but can you think of any other occasion where a senior civil servant has been involved in such a sensitive political investigation who has then taken such a senior post in the opposition party?
Well, we have seen those appointments, as you mentioned.
Nothing this high profile. Nothing this high profile following such a politically sensitive investigation such as Partygate. Surely there are other talented senior civil servants who could have been given this job.
Actually, what's important to us as Labour, as ever, is that we see the same rules and approaches being applied to this as you would see with any other appointment. That's why the civil service procedures on confidentiality will be followed. It's why the civil service watchdog, ACOBA, will need to look at this just as it would with any other appointment. And it's quite right those procedures will be followed. They will be for Sue Gray, just as they would be for any other senior civil servant.
You say that the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments will oversee this appointment, as the watchdog, but it's widely regarded to be a fairly toothless watchdog. And of course, there are, questions over the fact that Sir Keir Starmer is a personal friend of Sue Gray.
Well, actually, I think it's really important that Labour is bringing in people from a whole range of different backgrounds into our team to make sure that we will be ready for government. But I also think there's a big difference here between Labour's approach and, sadly, what has often been the Conservatives' approach. We want to be toughening rules across government when we hopefully come into government. We said, for example, we want to set up an independent Integrity and Ethics Commission that will ensure that rules across the piece are tougher, for example, around the ministerial code. And we will always follow rules when it comes to our own activity in opposition. And that's why, as I just said to you, and sorry to repeat it, but it is important, we're determined that those civil service procedures, when it comes to confidentiality and also the procedures of ACOBA, as you just mentioned, will be followed to make sure that there isn't a conflict of interest.